Normally, I do one review a week for an album, but so much stuff came out recently that I want to discuss that I decided to do my first multi-album review. And I found 3 albums worth discussing today. The first being Zac Brown Band's The Comeback, which is probably why you're here in the first place. It ain't really controversial to say that the owl was utter doo-doo, but I defend the album getting across one of the most ironically enjoyable narratives across that speaks volumes for Zac Brown as a person. If you want more info on that, here's the video with a link in the description. And believe it or not, this was not the first time the Zac Brown Band ventured so far out of their identity that they took it too far. Back in 2015, they did the experimental country record of Jekyll and Hyde, which wasn't bad, but a complete mess of way too many experimental avenues, hollow production, and dull songwriting. And in response to the mixed reception, they made their next album, Welcome Home, which saw them return to their musical roots and what made them iconic in the first place. It was pretty well received by fans and critics alike, and people began to sing that the true Zac Brown Band was Oh no! The Owl pretty much destroyed their legacy, but now they're apparently back again with The Comeback. It's kind of annoying you have to make an apology album towards the last album twice in your career. Now, musically, The Comeback is no Welcome Home. That album experimented with more alt music and folk. Here, the driving blend seems to be country and rock, which, truth be told, wasn't a driving motivation for any of their albums, so it's interesting to see that here. Now, I don't actively hate any of the music on here, but I can't help but feel like Zac Brown on this record feels paranoid of venturing out of a traditional headspace on this record. The rock influences, while capable of being identified, don't actually get to show off that much compared to other genre influences like Jump Right In and Roots. It often feels like the band is trying so hard to sound safe and not different so there isn't any outcry towards their music, as well as revisiting musical styles verbatim with songs like Same Boat clearly mimicking Chicken Fried. Even Messages was the slowed down portion of Honor Soldiers, also from Chicken Fried. Closer to Heaven is eerily reminiscent of Sweet Annie, and this record doesn't feel like a band record. One to Grow On by Mike and the Moon Pies is a band record, as they do several distinct musical phrases with their songs which, while different, complement one another so well. The Comeback just sticks with this monotonous phrasing and looping a lot of things. Slow Burn is an even drier version of something I'd expect Coldplay to do. I do appreciate the more lively songs such as Fun, but they can drag it out too much as well. The album, truth be told, feels like it can't quite get its footing immediately. The album starts out pretty derivative with Slow Burn out in the middle, but once we get to Us Against the World, the album begins to take shape. It has some pretty impactful moments like Stubborn Pride, which features Marcus King, and they give a passionate performance that I truly haven't seen since 2017. The Comeback is one of the more sensible COVID anthems, saying we're enduring but we will come back from this, and the choir edition is actually a really well added touch. But once the album realizes what it wants to be, it begins to decline in quality pretty significantly. The album begins to head back into its little safe space. Paradise Lost on Me tries to have Latin fusion like Uncaged, but it doesn't come close to the energy and liveliness that track had. G.A. Clay is way too overwhelming and an absolute tonal killer on the project. The one time they step out of their comfort zone, it fails pretty badly. Final 3 tracks have a bit more sensibility and try to desperately save the project, and while they are a good effort, I don't know, it just didn't sit right with me as a whole. It's gonna take more than friendlier music to win back the hearts of fans, so I hope Zac Brown can get it together and accomplish that in the future, because he definitely didn't here. Rating wise, I'm feeling a decent 6 out of 10 on The Comeback. And if you wanted to know where I would rank it now, I'd probably put it at number 5 between Jekyll and Hyde and Welcome Home. The next album I wanted to talk about was Toby Keith's Peso in My Pocket. Now, have any of you actually listened to a Toby Keith song after Clancy's Tavern? Anyone? Anyone? Yeah, I thought so. Everyone knows Toby Keith, but in recent years, he's pretty much become a has-been of a swept-under-the-rug age of country music. We all know him as the Angry American, the Patriot. But in the early days of his career, Toby Keith was a rising and respected star among the genre. Right out of the gate, he gave us one of the most beloved 90s country songs with Should Have Been a Cowboy, and slowly racked up hit after hit throughout the 90s, like Does That Blue Moon Ever Shine on You and Me Too. And while he could be this somber, reflective man, he also knew how to have fun with How Do You Like Me Now, which is one of my 10 all-time favorite songs ever. Toby Keith became a household name in the world of country. And then the world was shaken on the day of September 11th. The attack left the country devastated, and no one really knew how to respond. Some tried to give it a sense of love and remorse like Alan Jackson. Meanwhile, Toby Keith went in an alternative route. which would taint the entire genre for over a decade. In 2002, Toby Keith released Unleashed, all about how Toby Keith was going to be on the front lines, Lady Liberty was going to kick Al-Qaeda in the ass, and Ronald Reagan was going to show up on a velociraptor back from the dead with 2 AK-47s. That part didn't actually happen. Suddenly, a rise of nationalism became a singing country, and Toby became the face of that type of country music, spawning future singles like American Soldier, Made in America, and other stars began mimicking this like Brooks and Dunn and Justin Moore. At the time, Toby Keith had a monumental amount of support for his music and its message, and those that spoke out against it were relatively silenced. Toby fully enveloped the identity of the angry Americans throughout the 2000s. And then everyone with more than 2 brain cells realized the Iraq War was wrong and they re-elected one of the worst presidents ever. Suddenly, calling out nationalism country was suddenly cool and well justified. It quickly began to fade, and for Toby, who encapsulated this as his go-to brand, was really left to be forgotten, with Red Solo Cup being his last successful single. At that point, he still put out albums, but what success that existed on his older projects disappeared throughout the 2010s, with his music being either generic or just forgettable. But his latest project, Peso in My Pocket, did show some promise with an increase of energy and modern songwriting. And so how did it turn out? In fact, it turned out pretty enjoyable. Now, Peso in My Pocket isn't that good. In fact, I'd just call it decent, but decent is high praise for someone who's had one of the most mixed outputs the past few years. But Keith has actually shown life with how he performs on this album. The sonic taste of the album is surprisingly enthusiastic, with Old Me Better laying down some soulful influence, where he describes that he longs for that usefulness he no longer possesses, which, while portrayed positively, there's a hint of sadness in that fact. I'd go as far to say the entire album goes after that theme of acknowledgement of time. He recognizes that he isn't the angry American or the star he was back in the 90s, and in a sort of odd way, this album is him accepting that. In a way, you can say this is Toby Keith no longer singing like a hothead and finally singing like a boomer, longing for the days of the classic high school narrative where things were not as tense in the world. But like any modern mainstream album, you gotta pick your battles. The track entitled Happy Birthday America seems to be trying to capitalize on the naive worldview that America is dying. Unfortunately for Toby, he delivers what is one of the worst songs of the year by far, like astonishingly bad, with this uninspired sound of droning guitars and incredibly bland percussion, to giving one of his worst vocal performances to date. In a way, I'd actually compare this to the Chicks' March March, which suffered from many similar issues I'm discussing now, just in the opposite end of the political spectrum. But as a whole, I'd say the album was definitely worthwhile. You just gotta skip the points where Toby delves back into his bad habits in order to have a pretty enjoyable listen. I'm feeling a strong 6 out of 10 on Peso in My Pocket. Okay, on to the masterpiece. So, fun fact, I had yet to listen to a Brandi Carlile album up till this year, which is weird because she's one of the most popular low-profile artists in the country and Americana scene, right up there with Tyler Childers. I knew who she was back in 2019 when she was featured on that forgettable Maren Morris song, and when I got word of the Highwomen forming, she definitely felt like the driving force of that album, and I was inclined to get into her work, which was honestly astounding. The Story, The Firewatcher's Daughter, and By the Way I Forgive You are truly great works of art. The experimentation of these records always felt reinventive of the last album's previous concepts, only getting more fresh than the last. And going into this album was very interesting. Of course I had high expectations, but what I didn't expect was this album to thoroughly surpass all of them. In These Silent Days is one of the most grand, beautiful, and tightly written albums to be released this year. I'd argue for the past albums, Carlile, while willing to expand, never could quite steer the sonic directions of her albums into a steady course. But here, everything is so diverse in how it behaves, yet is tied together quite consistently. From the piano ballads, the rock jams, 70s outlaw country, to even some metal influence on the record. Carlile, in my opinion, does the genre of Americana justice, which is a term many have dubbed as country that's too country for Nashville. But I would say this isn't a country album. Americana to me seems to blend in the genres of rock, folk, soul, and country, and while it may be just added together, Brandi Carlile makes it seem like mixing different paints to form something completely new. To me, the story of this album surrounds some of the feelings Carlile and to an extension many others felt throughout the COVID pandemic. Feelings of loneliness, guilt, escapism, and even a bit of hatred, not just towards others, but to herself, especially in the opener entitled Right on Time, where Carlile seems to be in a scenario that has pushed people away, and while it wasn't right, it was right on time as the COVID pandemic had just begun, not allowing for tension seemingly to be resolved. The line of saying it wasn't right, but right on time instantly lets you know this is a lyrically driven album, and it only gets better from here. On You and Me on the Rock, the sheer vividness of the imagery Carlile provides is truly impeccable, of building wooden houses on frozen ponds in the summertime when the water's gone, in diagonal lines and their rolled out lawns, really putting us into this location in ways not many albums are truly capable of doing. The song deals with her willingness to endure hard times about to occur and describes her relationship with her wife pretty beautifully, bringing in a lot of the simple life and the dynamic with her wife going on a walk and her attending to her garden, making this declaration the money and the fame isn't a priority. Meanwhile, the next song lyrically ups the ante quite a bit. I'm a bit confused at the sentiment, which is for the bandmates' children, and is supposed to be a letter for after they pass? Which really makes me question, is someone about to die or something? I get the sympathy, and lyrically it's fantastic, I just hope everyone's okay. Broken Horses seems to be a blend in her humble beginnings of starting from the bottom with her religion as a Christian, and how going through her life has sharpened her and made her tough as nails. And I love the detail of spitting someone out like lukewarm water. It's lines that are, pun intended, so refreshing and yet so relatable to how we as human beings operate. And this is easily one of the most fire tracks on the record. The upbeat tempo, the rocking guitars, Carlile's performance, it's all just fantastic. If you want a banger, this is that moment on the album. Then we have what might possibly be my new favorite song of the year with Letter to the Past, a dedication to her daughter in which she sees similarities between her and her younger self, and in a way she represents this letter to the past, this promise even. And I just really connected with a lot of the emotions and how Brandi describes her daughter. This is the most transcending moment on the album emotionally, and it definitely will resonate with a lot of people who struggled during the pandemic. Then the album explores paranoia and self-hate with Mama Werewolf, where Brandi sees herself becoming a monster and asking her children to pull her back, to be the silver bullets that will put her down. It's also one of the primary examples of Carlile willing to shake things up rhythmically and stylistically. In some way that reminds me of the Highwaymen and 70s Johnny Cash. And how Dave Cobb and Shooter Jennings produced the track, you get a lot of that classic influence in the reverb. The classic acoustic vibe, it really takes me back. Stay Gentle is another one. I get what it's trying to do, but I can't help but question it. It's trying to have a childish melodic vibe, but it feels like it's dumbing it down to an extreme extent. And lyrically, not only does it say the least message-wise, the execution of said song is rather lackluster, but man, the moment it falls over, this album immediately gets back up with Sinners, Saints, and Fools, which tells the story of irony of this devoted religious man who believes it's his duty to cast shame upon others, that he is inflicting his twisted version of God's will onto others through hate speech and signs of shame towards, in this scenario, immigrants, preaching, "Oh, you're not coming in the right way. What you're doing is wrong," without being empathetic and understanding the way the Bible tells Christians to be. And the song concludes with this person being denied entry to heaven because he didn't do it the right way. The same words he told all those people, and is sent to the bowels of hell, as the music shifts into this more metal-esque vibe to represent the descent into madness. It's a moment where everything works perfectly, from the lyrics, the build-up, her performance, and her band all coming together for this terrifying yet incredible moment. This album is truly incredible. I haven't seen an album work this well lyrically in this sphere in such a long time. Brandi has once more broken barriers, built on ideas, and seems insanely well, to a point where this album can truly go head to head with any other album this year. I'm truly enamored by this experience. It's easily become one of my favorite albums in the past 3 years. And another masterpiece in Dave Cobb's repertoire. I'm not going to add it to my next ranking video because it was co-produced and my Dave Cobb ranking is incredibly long as is, but please, I implore you to check this album out. If you are a lyric nut like me, you owe it to yourself to listen to this album. Albums this good only come around rarely. Rating wise, I'm feeling a decent 9 out of 10 on In These Silent Days. Man, 2021 is finally shaping up into something truly magnificent.